The morning sun cast long shadows across the Navy training facility as recruits gathered for another grueling day. Among the sea of muscular bodies and boisterous voices, one figure stood apart. Sarah Chun moved quietly through the crowd, her slight frame almost invisible among the towering men around her. At 5 feet 4 inches and barely weighing 130 pounds, she looked more like a librarian than a potential Navy SEAL. "Look at that," whispered Marcus Rivera to his buddy Jake Thompson. "What's a Girl Scout doing here?" The comment sparked a ripple of snickers from nearby recruits. Sarah heard every word but kept her eyes forward, her face showing no emotion. She had learned long ago that silence was often the best response to ignorance. The training facility buzzed with nervous energy as 200 recruits prepared for the most challenging military program in the world. Most had impressive backgrounds: college football stars, former Marines, accomplished athletes. Sarah's file, if anyone bothered to read it, showed only basic information. Age 24, college graduate, no military experience. What it didn't reveal was the truth that would eventually shock everyone. Instructor Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez called the group to attention. His voice boomed across the courtyard like thunder. "Welcome to SEAL training, ladies and gentlemen. Look to your left, look to your right. Statistically, only 1 in 10 of you will complete this program. The rest will quit, fail, or wash out." His eyes scanned the crowd, pausing briefly on Sarah. "This program doesn't care about your college degree, your daddy's money, or your high school football records. It cares about one thing. Can you push beyond what you think is possible?" The first week focused on basic physical assessments. Sarah struggled with some exercises, particularly those requiring brute strength. During rope climbing, she watched helplessly as recruits half her size scrambled up with ease while she fought for every inch. The whispers grew louder. "She won't last a week," declared Tommy Henderson, a former college wrestler. "This isn't a game. People die in the field if you can't carry your weight." Several recruits nodded in agreement. They saw her struggle with pull-ups, watched her finish last in swimming exercises, and concluded she was taking up a spot meant for someone more qualified. But Sarah possessed something that couldn't be measured on any fitness test. Growing up in rural Montana, she had spent countless hours in the wilderness with her grandfather, a Vietnam War veteran who rarely spoke about his service. While other kids played video games, Sarah learned to track deer through dense forests, to remain motionless for hours waiting for the perfect shot, and to read the subtle signs of nature that most people never noticed. Her grandfather had taught her patience above all else. "Anyone can shoot fast," he would say during their hunting trips. "But a true marksman waits for the moment when success is certain." These lessons were embedded deep in Sarah's character, though she had never spoken about them to anyone at the facility. During the second week, recruits faced their first marksmanship evaluation. The shooting range was filled with the crack of rifles and the smell of gunpowder. Most recruits approached the exercise with confidence, many having hunted or shot recreationally. Sarah took her position at lane 15, checking her equipment with methodical precision. "This should be interesting," muttered Jake Thompson, positioned 2 lanes over. "Let's see how Little Miss Perfect handles real firepower." Several instructors gathered to observe, curiosity evident on their faces. They had seen Sarah's struggles with physical training and wondered how she would perform with weapons. The first round involved shooting at stationary targets from 100 yards. Sarah settled into her firing position, her breathing slow and controlled. As the command to fire rang out, rifles erupted around her. Sarah waited. She observed wind patterns, studied the light, and analyzed every variable. Only then did she take her first shot. Bullseye. The range officer looked surprised but said nothing. It could have been luck. Sarah fired her remaining rounds with the same deliberate approach. Each shot struck the center ring with mechanical precision. By the end of the exercise, her target looked like someone had used a hole punch in the exact center. "Lucky day for the librarian," commented Marcus Rivera, though his voice carried less conviction than before. Several recruits glanced at Sarah's target with newfound curiosity, but most dismissed it as beginner's luck. The second exercise increased the difficulty to 300 yards with moving targets. This was where experience and natural ability separated the wheat from the chaff. Many recruits, despite their confidence, struggled with the increased distance and movement variables. Sarah again took her time, studying patterns and calculating angles. Her first shot struck a moving target center mass. Then another, and another. By the exercise's end, Sarah had achieved a perfect score, something that happened perhaps once or twice per training cycle. The range had grown noticeably quieter. Instructor Gunnery Sergeant Williams, a 20-year veteran with multiple combat deployments, approached Sarah's station. He examined her target through binoculars, his weathered face showing no emotion. "Recruit Chun," he said finally. "You've handled firearms before." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied simply. "Some hunting with family." "Some hunting," Williams repeated, studying the precise shot grouping. "I've seen Marine snipers with less accuracy." He walked away without another word, leaving Sarah to clean her weapon in solitude. That evening in the barracks, the atmosphere was different. The jokes and mockery hadn't stopped entirely, but there was an undercurrent of uncertainty. Tommy Henderson approached Sarah's bunk with forced casualness. "Not bad shooting today," he said. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" "My grandfather taught me," Sarah replied, continuing to read her manual. "He must be some teacher. What branch did he serve in?" Sarah looked up for the first time. He never talked much about his service. Said some things were better left in the past. This non-answer frustrated Tommy, but something in Sarah's tone discouraged further questioning. She had a way of creating distance without being rude, of answering questions without revealing information. The third week brought the infamous Hell Week, 5.5 days of continuous training with minimal sleep. This was where most dropouts occurred, where the human body and spirit were pushed beyond normal limits. Sarah knew this would be her greatest challenge. Physical endurance had always been her weakness. The week began at midnight with instructors screaming, sirens wailing, and recruits scrambling from their beds into the cold Pacific Ocean. The shock of frigid water hit like electricity, and several recruits immediately began questioning their life choices. For the next 130 hours, Sarah and her fellow recruits endured a hellish combination of physical challenges, mental pressure, and sleep deprivation. They carried heavy boats over their heads across sandy beaches, completed obstacle courses in record time, and performed endless physical exercises while instructors screamed criticism and encouragement. Sarah's small frame became both an advantage and disadvantage. She could slip through obstacles that challenged larger recruits, but she struggled with activities requiring pure strength. During boat carries, she gritted her teeth and pushed beyond what her body thought possible, while teammates sometimes had to compensate for her physical limitations. "Come on, Chun," yelled her boat crew leader during one particularly grueling exercise. "We're only as strong as our weakest link." The word stung because Sarah knew he was right. Her determination was absolute, but her body had limits. Yet something remarkable happened as the week progressed. While stronger recruits began to break mentally, Sarah's resolve never wavered. She had learned patience and endurance in Montana's harsh wilderness. She understood that pain was temporary, but quitting was permanent. By the fourth day, when exhaustion had reduced many recruits to stumbling zombies, Sarah maintained her focus. She helped struggling teammates, offered quiet encouragement, and never complained despite obvious physical pain. Her calm demeanor in chaos began to earn respect from unexpected sources. "That girl's got steel for a spine," observed instructor Rodriguez to his colleague. "She's half the size of these guys, but twice as mentally tough." During a particularly challenging log carry exercise, recruit David Park, a former college football player, collapsed from exhaustion. Other teammates wanted to leave him behind to maintain their pace. Sarah immediately moved to help, positioning herself to support his weight despite being 70 pounds lighter. "Leave me," Park gasped. "I'm done." "Nobody gets left behind," Sarah replied firmly. "We finish together or not at all." Her actions inspired the team to rally around Park, helping him complete the exercise. The incident didn't go unnoticed by instructors, who made notes about leadership potential in unexpected places. The week's final challenge was a 14-mile beach run in full gear. Starting in darkness before dawn, recruits had to complete the course before sunrise. Sarah's legs felt like concrete pillars, and every step sent shocks of pain through her exhausted body. Halfway through the run, she noticed Marcus Rivera, one of her earliest critics, struggling badly. His breathing was labored, and he was falling behind the main group. Sarah had every reason to ignore him and focus on her own survival. Instead, she dropped back. "Stay with me," she said simply, matching his pace. "We can do this together." "Why?" Marcus gasped. "I've been nothing but cruel to you." "Because that's what teammates do," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her own exhaustion. Together, they completed the run just under the time limit. Marcus collapsed at the finish line, but not before looking at Sarah with something approaching awe. "I don't understand you," he said, "but I respect you." Of the 200 recruits who began training, only 87 remained after Hell Week. Sarah Chun was among them, battered but unbroken. More importantly, she had earned something money couldn't buy: the respect of her peers and instructors. As recruits were given their first full night's sleep in days, Sarah lay in her bunk reflecting on the week's challenges. She had proven she belonged here, but she also knew the hardest tests lay ahead. What her fellow recruits didn't realize was that everything they had seen was just the beginning of discovering who Sarah Chun really was. The next phase of training would introduce specialized skills, including advanced marksmanship and tactical operations. For Sarah, this meant the opportunity to demonstrate abilities she had kept hidden, skills learned not in any military academy, but in the remote wilderness of Montana under the guidance of a grandfather whose past was far more complex than anyone imagined. As sleep finally claimed her exhausted body, Sarah's last thought was of her grandfather's words: "Patience, little eagle. The right moment always comes to those who wait." Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Sarah Chun was ready for whatever lay ahead. The quiet girl who had been mocked and dismissed had survived the crucible. Soon, everyone would learn that underestimating Sarah Chun was a mistake they would never make again. The weeks following Hell Week brought a new intensity to SEAL training. Recruits who had survived the physical and mental crucible now faced specialized skill development. The 87 remaining candidates were divided into smaller groups for advanced instruction in areas ranging from underwater demolitions to close-quarters combat. Sarah found herself assigned to Alpha Squad, led by Petty Officer First Class David Kim, a decorated veteran with 2 combat deployments. Kim was known for his no-nonsense approach and ability to identify potential in unexpected places. He had watched Sarah's performance during Hell Week with growing interest. "Today we begin advanced marksmanship training," Kim announced to the 12-member squad. "This isn't about shooting paper targets at a comfortable range. We're talking about precision shooting under stress, in adverse conditions, with lives depending on your accuracy." The training facility's advanced range was unlike anything Sarah had seen before. Multiple levels, moving targets, variable lighting, and environmental chambers that could simulate everything from Arctic conditions to desert sandstorms. It was designed to push shooters beyond conventional limits. "Our first exercise involves precision shooting at 600 yards, Kim continued. "You'll be firing from an elevated position at targets that appear randomly for 5-second intervals. Miss the window, and the target disappears. Real combat doesn't give you second chances." The squad moved to their positions. Sarah was assigned Station 7, which offered a challenging angle requiring compensation for both elevation and wind drift. As she settled into position, she heard the familiar whispers from nearby recruits. "Let's see if her luck holds," muttered Rick Patterson, a former Army Ranger who had joined the program. 600 yards is where real shooters separate from wannabes. Sarah checked her equipment methodically: rifle scope adjustment, ammunition, breathing control, and body position. Around her, other recruits were already taking practice shots, trying to gauge wind conditions and distance. Sarah remained still, observing. She watched the patterns of target appearance, noting the intervals and sequences. She studied how wind affected the flags at various distances. Most importantly, she listened to the subtle sounds that indicated when targets were about to activate, to the rhythm of the range operations, to the environmental factors that would affect her shots. When the exercise began, chaos erupted around her. Rifles cracked rapidly as recruits fired at targets that appeared and vanished with unforgiving speed. Many shots went wide or struck empty air as shooters rushed their timing. Sarah waited for her first target to appear. When it did, she had already calculated every variable. Her shot struck center mass just as the target began to retract. Then, another target, another perfect hit. By the exercise's end, Sarah had achieved a 100% hit rate on 12 targets, while most squad members managed only 3 or 4 successful shots. Petty Officer Kim studied the results with barely concealed amazement. "Recruit Chun," he called out. "Front and center." Sarah approached, maintaining the neutral expression that had become her trademark. Kim examined her target results, then looked at her with new interest. "In 20 years of instruction, I've seen maybe 5 shooters achieve perfect scores on this exercise. Most of those were seasoned snipers with years of combat experience." He paused, studying Sarah's face for any hint of smugness or pride. He found none. "Sir, I was fortunate with wind conditions," Sarah replied simply. "Fortunate," Kim repeated. "Let's test that fortune." He turned to address the squad. "Next exercise, 800 yards, moving targets, simulated combat stress. Recruit Chun, you'll demonstrate first." The second exercise was designed to break down shooters mentally. Speakers blasted combat sounds, explosions, gunfire, shouting voices. Strobing lights simulated muzzle flashes and artillery impacts. Smoke machines created visibility challenges. Through this chaos, Sarah would have to hit targets moving unpredictably at nearly half a mile distance. Sarah took her position as squad members gathered to watch. Many expected the sensory overload to shatter her previous performance. The combat stress simulation began with a thunderous explosion that made several observers flinch. Through the chaos, Sarah found perfect calm. The sounds and lights that were meant to distract her became background noise, no different from the wind through trees or the call of distant birds. This was a skill her grandfather had taught her, the ability to find stillness within chaos. Her first shot struck a moving target cleanly. Then another. The accuracy was so consistent that Kim began to suspect equipment malfunction. He examined Sarah's rifle and scope, finding everything standard issued and properly zeroed. "Where exactly did you learn to shoot?" Kim asked during a brief pause in the exercise. "Montana, sir. Hunting with my grandfather." "Your grandfather must have been quite the marksman." Sarah's expression flickered briefly, a moment of deeper emotion quickly suppressed. "He taught me that shooting isn't about the rifle or the scope. It's about understanding yourself and your environment completely." Kim sensed there was more to the story, but didn't press. Military families often had complex histories, and some stories were told only when the teller was ready. The exercise continued with increasingly difficult scenarios. Targets at maximum range, multiple moving objects, time pressure, and environmental interference. Through it all, Sarah maintained accuracy that bordered on supernatural. By the session's end, she had hit 47 of 50 targets, a score that exceeded many professional snipers. Word of Sarah's performance spread quickly through the training facility. Instructors who had dismissed her as a physical liability began to take notice. More importantly, her squad members started viewing her differently. The quiet girl who struggled with rope climbs was revealing capabilities that commanded respect. That evening, Petty Officer Kim made an unusual phone call to his commanding officer, Captain Michael Torres. Torres had overseen SEAL training for 8 years and had developed an eye for exceptional talent. "Sir, I need to discuss one of our recruits," Kim began. "Sarah Chun. I think you should observe her shooting personally." "The small girl who barely made it through Hell Week?" Torres replied. "What about her?" "She's achieving scores I've never seen from a recruit. Perfect accuracy under conditions that challenge experienced operators. There's something unusual about her background." Captain Torres had learned to trust Kim's judgment. "Set up a demonstration for tomorrow. I'll observe personally." The next morning brought news that Captain Torres would be evaluating selected recruits. For most, this was an honor and an opportunity to impress senior leadership. For Sarah, it was simply another day of training. The evaluation took place on the facility's most challenging range, a 1,000-yard course with multiple obstacles, extreme elevation changes, and targets that required precision shooting from awkward positions. Only the top recruits were selected for this assessment. Captain Torres arrived with several senior instructors, including Master Chief Rodriguez and Gunnery Sergeant Williams. At 45 years old, Torres was a legendary figure in the SEAL community, a veteran of countless operations who had personally trained some of the military's finest snipers. "Today's exercise simulates a real-world scenario," Torres announced to the 5 selected recruits. You're providing overwatch for a hostage rescue operation. Targets will appear at various distances and situations. Some are hostiles to be eliminated. Others are civilians to be protected. Split-second decisions and perfect accuracy are required. The scenario began with recruits positioned on a hillside overlooking a mock urban environment. Targets would appear in windows, behind vehicles, and in doorways. Each shooter had to identify threats, assess backgrounds for civilian safety, and deliver precise shots under time pressure. Sarah was positioned last in the firing order, giving her the opportunity to observe her competitor's performance. The first recruit, a former Marine with impressive credentials, managed to hit 6 of 10 targets with 2 civilian casualties. The second shooter, Rick Patterson, achieved 7 hits with 1 civilian casualty. When Sarah's turn arrived, Captain Torres watched with particular attention. She settled into her position with the methodical care that had become her signature. As the scenario began, her performance was unlike anything the observers had witnessed. Sarah didn't just hit targets. She seemed to anticipate them. Her shots came at the precise moment targets became vulnerable, often before other observers had even identified the threat. She eliminated 9 hostile targets with perfect precision while avoiding all civilian casualties. What impressed Captain Torres most wasn't just the accuracy, it was the tactical intelligence. Sarah understood angles of fire, background safety, and target prioritization with intuition that usually required years of combat experience. Recruit Chun, Torres called after the exercise concluded. Approach. Sarah walked over, maintaining her characteristic composure. Torres examined her score sheet, then studied her face carefully. In 30 years of military service, I've encountered perhaps a dozen natural shooters with your level of ability. Most were seasoned veterans with extensive combat experience. He paused. You claim to have learned this from recreational hunting? Yes, sir. My grandfather was thorough in his instruction. I'm beginning to think your grandfather's hunting trips were more complex than you've indicated. Torres's tone wasn't accusatory, but probing. Would you care to elaborate on his background? For the first time since arriving at the facility, Sarah hesitated. The question touched on family history she had never discussed with anyone. Her grandfather had made her promise never to reveal certain details of his past, but she was beginning to realize that promise might be impossible to keep. Sir, my grandfather served in Vietnam. He was awarded several medals, but never spoke about his service. He taught me shooting and field craft as a way of spending time together, not as military training. Torres nodded slowly. Vietnam veterans often carried secrets that shaped their families in unexpected ways. What was your grandfather's name and unit? Thomas Chun, sir. I don't know his specific unit designation. Torres made a mental note to research Thomas Chin's service record. Something about Sarah's abilities suggested her grandfather's story was more significant than family hunting trips. After the evaluation, Torres called a meeting with his senior staff. The topic was unusual. What to do with a recruit whose natural abilities far exceeded normal parameters. Gentlemen, we have a situation, Torres began. Recruit Chun is displaying marksmanship skills that rival our most experienced operators. Her tactical instincts suggest training or exposure beyond civilian hunting. Master Chief Rodriguez had been thinking about this issue. Could she be a plant? Foreign intelligence attempting to infiltrate the program. Possible, but unlikely, replied Gunnery Sergeant Williams. Her background check was thorough. American-born, college-educated, no foreign travel or contacts. If she's a spy, she's the most convincing one I've ever encountered. Torres steepled his fingers thoughtfully. There's another possibility. Her grandfather's Vietnam service might be more significant than she realizes. I'm going to request his military records. That evening, Torres made several phone calls to contacts in military intelligence and veteran affairs. Thomas Chin's service record, when it finally arrived, would answer many questions while raising others that were far more complex. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her training, unaware that her performance had triggered a high-level investigation into her family's past. She focused on each day's challenges, gradually earning the respect of fellow recruits through consistent excellence and quiet leadership. The transformation in how others treated her was remarkable. Recruits who had initially mocked her now sought her advice on shooting techniques. Squad members began deferring to her judgment during tactical exercises. Even Rick Patterson, her harshest early critic, had begun treating her with grudging respect. But Sarah remained focused on the larger goal, completing SEAL training and earning her place among the military's elite. She had no idea that her grandfather's carefully guarded secrets were about to be revealed, or that her family's history would soon explain everything about her extraordinary abilities. As another week of training concluded, Sarah lay in her bunk reflecting on how much had changed since those early days of mockery and doubt. She had proven her worth through performance, but she sensed that larger challenges lay ahead. Unknown to her, Captain Torres had just received Thomas Chin's complete military file. What he read would change everything about how the Navy viewed Sarah Chun and force her to confront a family legacy she had never fully understood. Captain Torres stared at the classified documents spread across his desk, reading them for the third time. Thomas Chin's military file painted a picture that explained everything about his granddaughter's extraordinary abilities and raised serious questions about what she might know about her family's history. The file was thick with commendations, mission reports, and classified operational details. Thomas Chun hadn't been an ordinary infantryman in Vietnam. He had been part of an elite reconnaissance unit that later evolved into what would become the modern Special Operations Community. His official designation was military advisor, but the mission reports told a different story. Chun had been a sniper, not just any sniper, but one of the most effective long-range specialists of the Vietnam conflict. His confirmed kill count was classified, but the number was staggering even by modern standards. More importantly, he had trained local forces in advanced marksmanship and fieldcraft, developing techniques that were later incorporated into military doctrine. The file contained photographs of Chun receiving the Navy Cross, Silver Star, and Bronze Star with V device for valor. There were also documents indicating his involvement in classified operations that wouldn't be declassified for another 20 years. This was a man whose contributions to military science had been significant, but deliberately obscured. Most intriguing was a notation from 1975, just before Chin's retirement. He had been offered a position training military snipers at the newly established Naval Special Warfare Development Group. He declined, citing a desire to return to civilian life and family responsibilities. The file indicated he had married recently and wanted to start a family away from military influence. Torres picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he rarely used, the Pentagon office that maintained records on special operations veterans. Within an hour, he had additional details that completed the picture. Thomas Chun had indeed retired to Montana, where he purchased a remote ranch and deliberately disappeared from military circles. He had married, raised a daughter, and later helped raise his granddaughter after his daughter's death in a car accident when Sarah was 12. The family had lived in complete isolation, with Chin apparently never discussing his military service with anyone. The most significant detail was in Chin's psychological evaluation from 1975. The military psychiatrist noted that Chin possessed an almost supernatural ability to read environments and predict human behavior, skills that made him extraordinarily effective but also psychologically exhausting to maintain. The doctor recommended extended leave from operational duties to prevent complete mental breakdown. Torres now understood what he was seeing in Sarah. She hadn't learned marksmanship from casual hunting trips. She had been trained by one of America's most effective combat snipers using techniques developed in actual warfare. More importantly, she might have inherited the same intuitive abilities that had made her grandfather legendary. The question was, how much did Sarah know about her grandfather's past? Torres decided on a direct approach. He called Sarah to his office the next morning, timing the meeting during regular training hours to avoid drawing attention from other recruits. Sarah knocked and entered precisely at 0800, standing at attention with the crisp bearing that had become natural to her. Torres gestured for her to sit, noting how her eyes quickly scanned the room, a habit that suggested constant situational awareness. "Recruit Chun, I want to discuss your grandfather's military service," Torres began, watching her reaction carefully. Sarah's expression didn't change, but Torres noticed her hands tighten slightly on the chair arms. "Sir, as I mentioned, my grandfather served in Vietnam, but didn't discuss his experiences. Thomas Chun, Navy Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Star with V device for valor." Torres read from the file. Confirmed kills classified, but numbering in the hundreds. specialist in long-range reconnaissance, and enemy personnel elimination. This time Sarah's reaction was visible. Her eyes widened briefly before she regained control. Sir, I was not aware of those details. Your grandfather was one of the most effective snipers in American military history, Torres continued. He trained Allied forces in advanced marksmanship and developed field techniques that influenced modern special operations doctrine. Sarah absorbed this information silently. Many pieces of her childhood suddenly made sense. Her grandfather's insistence on perfect patience, his ability to move through forests without making sound, his knowledge of weather patterns and wind effects. What she had interpreted as hunting wisdom had actually been combat expertise. Sir, my grandfather never mentioned medals or military achievements. He taught me shooting and outdoor skills, but framed them as family activities. Yet you display abilities that typically require years of professional instruction, Torres observed. Your tactical awareness, shooting accuracy, and field craft suggest training far beyond recreational hunting. Sarah considered her response carefully. My grandfather was thorough in everything he taught. He said that if something was worth doing, it should be done perfectly. I assumed that was his personality, not military training. Torres pulled out a photograph from the file, a black and white image of Thomas Chun in dress uniform receiving the Navy Cross. Sarah studied the image, seeing her grandfather as a young man in military regalia she had never imagined. He looks different than I remember, she said quietly. Harder, more intense. Combat changes people, Torres replied. Your grandfather apparently decided to leave that life behind completely when he retired. He built a new identity as a rancher and family man. Why are you showing me this, sir? Torres leaned forward. Because your abilities suggest you've inherited more than just his marksmanship skills. The way you read tactical situations, anticipate enemy movement, understand battlefield dynamics. These aren't learned behaviors. They're intuitive gifts that run in families. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. Her grandfather had often commented on her natural instincts, her ability to sense when animals were present before seeing them, her talent for reading people's intentions through subtle cues. She had thought these were normal human abilities enhanced by outdoor experience. What exactly are you suggesting, sir? I'm suggesting that your grandfather saw these same abilities in you and decided to develop them through hunting and field training. He may have believed that if you ever chose military service, you would be prepared to survive and excel. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Petty Officer Kim entered with an urgent expression. Sir, we have a situation. Intelligence has received reports of terrorist activity near the Mexican border. They're requesting immediate deployment of a reconnaissance team to gather intelligence on suspected weapon smuggling operations. Torres frowned. Using SEAL trainees for active operations was highly irregular, but the current global situation sometimes required flexible responses. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Immediate deployment, sir. The window for intelligence gathering closes in 48 hours. Regular special operations teams are engaged in other theaters. Torres made a quick decision that would test his theories about Sarah's abilities under real-world conditions. Select 4 of our most advanced trainees for a reconnaissance-only mission. No direct engagement, pure intelligence gathering. He looked at Sarah. Recruit Chun, you'll be part of the team. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Real operational deployment was months ahead of schedule, but she simply replied, Yes, sir. Kim began outlining the mission parameters. A suspected terrorist cell was using remote desert locations to cache weapons and coordinate border crossings. The team would establish observation posts, document activities, and report intelligence without engaging targets. This is primarily a surveillance and reconnaissance mission, Kim emphasized. Your job is to observe and report. The shooter role will be backup only if the team is compromised and needs to break contact. Sarah nodded, but both Torres and Kim recognized that her marksmanship skills made her the logical choice for Overwatch positions during the operation. The team was assembled quickly. Sarah as the designated marksman, Rick Patterson handling communications, David Park managing logistics, and Marcus Rivera serving as team leader. All 4 had proven themselves during training, though none had expected their first real operation to come so soon. Equipment preparation took place in the facility's staging area. Sarah was issued a precision rifle system she had never used before, a military-grade weapon with advanced optics and ammunition designed for extreme accuracy at long ranges. As she familiarized herself with the new equipment, Master Chief Rodriguez approached with additional gear. "Chun, you'll be carrying specialized equipment for this mission," he said, handing her a rangefinder and environmental measurement device. "Your job is to provide accurate intelligence on distances, terrain features, and potential threats from elevated positions." Sarah accepted the equipment with growing excitement and nervousness. This would be her first opportunity to apply her skills in actual operational conditions. The team received final briefings on the target area, remote desert terrain near the Arizona-Mexico border. Satellite imagery showed a complex landscape of canyons, ridges, and hidden valleys where vehicles could move undetected. Perfect terrain for both smuggling operations and reconnaissance work. "Remember, this is intelligence gathering only," Kim repeated during the final briefing. "You observe, document, and report. No direct action unless your team is in immediate danger." That evening, as the team prepared for deployment, Sarah called her grandfather for the first time since beginning SEAL training. She had questions that needed answers, and she suspected he would understand why she was asking. "Grandpa, I need to know about your military service," she said without preamble. There was a long silence on the phone. Finally, Thomas Chin spoke in a voice that carried decades of carefully guarded memories. "What has happened, Little Eagle? I'm being deployed on a reconnaissance mission. My commanding officers know about your service record. They showed me photographs of you receiving medals I never knew existed." Another pause. "I had hoped that part of my life would remain buried. I trained you to survive in the wilderness, not to become a soldier. But you knew this was a possibility when you taught me everything you did." "Perhaps," her grandfather admitted. "You have gifts, Sarah. The same gifts that made me effective in war, but cost me pieces of my soul. I hoped you would use them for better purposes." "Maybe I am," Sarah replied. "Maybe protecting people is the better purpose." Her grandfather's voice carried a mixture of pride and concern when he spoke again. "Then, remember what I taught you about patience and precision. Trust your instincts completely, but never let anger or fear guide your decisions. And, Sarah, come home safely. You're all the family I have left." As Sarah prepared her equipment for the next day's deployment, she reflected on the conversation. Her grandfather's reluctance to discuss his past suddenly made sense. He had seen the cost of military excellence firsthand and tried to shield her from that world while still preparing her to survive in it. The mission ahead would test everything she had learned, both in SEAL training and during those long Montana hunting trips that had been much more than family bonding. For the first time, Sarah would discover whether her inherited abilities would translate to real-world operational success. Unknown to her, Captain Torres had made additional arrangements for the mission. A senior sniper instructor would be monitoring the operation remotely, ready to provide guidance if Sarah's team encountered situations beyond their training level. As dawn approached, Sarah gathered with her team for final equipment checks and mission rehearsal. The quiet girl who had been mocked during early training was about to face her first real test as a military professional. The desert operation would reveal whether Thomas Chin's granddaughter possessed the same extraordinary abilities that had made him legendary, and whether she could handle the psychological pressures that came with such gifts. The helicopter lifted off from the naval facility at 0300 hours, carrying Sarah's team into the pre-dawn darkness toward the Arizona desert. Through the aircraft's small window, she watched city lights give way to the vast emptiness that would be their operational area for the next 48 hours. Marcus Rivera reviewed the mission parameters one final time over the aircraft's communication system. Their target was a remote canyon system where intelligence suggested weapons caches and personnel movement were occurring. The team would establish overlapping observation posts to monitor activities and gather intelligence without engaging unless directly threatened. Sarah checked her equipment for the third time: precision rifle, advanced optics, range-finding equipment, and communication gear. More importantly, she mentally reviewed her grandfather's teachings about patience, observation, and reading terrain. Those lessons seemed more relevant now than any classroom instruction. The insertion point was a flat desert area 5 miles from their target zone. The helicopter touched down just long enough for the team to unload equipment and personnel before disappearing back into the night sky. Within minutes, Sarah found herself standing in complete desert silence, surrounded by darkness that would have been terrifying to most people, but felt natural to her. "Comms check," Rivera whispered into his radio. Each team member confirmed their equipment was functional. "Chun, you'll establish overwatch on the ridge overlooking the main canyon. Park and Patterson, you're setting up observation posts at the eastern and western approaches. I'll coordinate from the central position." Sarah shouldered her pack and began moving toward her assigned position. The terrain was challenging: loose rock, steep inclines, and cacti that could tear equipment or flesh if approached carelessly. But moving through difficult terrain at night was something she had learned as a child during her grandfather's training. She reached her position just as the first hint of dawn appeared on the eastern horizon. The location offered commanding views of the canyon system while providing natural camouflage among large rock formations. Sarah established her hide site using principles her grandfather had taught her: minimal disturbance, natural materials, and positioning that offered both concealment and multiple escape routes. As daylight increased, the landscape revealed itself in stunning detail. The canyon system was more complex than satellite images had suggested, with multiple levels, hidden passages, and natural choke points that would channel any movement through predictable areas. Sarah settled behind her rifle and began the methodical process of mapping the terrain. She identified key distances, wind patterns, potential hiding spots, and movement corridors. Every detail was recorded in the small notebook that would become part of the mission intelligence report. At 0847 hours, movement appeared in the canyon below. 3 vehicles, 2 pickup trucks, and a larger panel van approached from the south along a barely visible dirt track. Sarah immediately reported the contact to Rivera while tracking the vehicles through her rifle scope. The vehicles stopped at a location approximately 800 yards from Sarah's position. Through her optics, she could clearly observe the personnel who emerged: 6 men in civilian clothing, armed with automatic weapons. Their movements were disciplined and coordinated, suggesting military or paramilitary training. "Overwatch to control," Sarah whispered into her radio. 6 military-age males, professionally armed and equipped. Vehicles appear to be carrying cargo in addition to personnel. "Copy, Overwatch. Continue observation and document activities." For the next 2 hours, Sarah watched the men systematically unload wooden crates from the vehicles and move them to a concealed location among the canyon rocks. The operation was clearly well-planned and professionally executed. These weren't amateur smugglers, but experienced operators working as part of a larger organization. At 1,130 hours, the situation changed dramatically. Sarah detected movement from a different direction, additional vehicles approaching from the northeast. But something about their movement pattern triggered alarm bells in her mind. "Control, Overwatch. Additional vehicles approaching from grid 347 to 891. Movement pattern suggests hostile intent toward our primary targets." Rivera's voice came back immediately. "Explain hostile intent assessment." Sarah struggled to articulate the intuitive understanding that had prompted her warning. Vehicle spacing, approach angle, and timing suggest ambush or assault rather than coordination with primary targets. Recommend increased alert status. This was the kind of tactical intuition Captain Torres had mentioned, an ability to read situations that went beyond normal observation skills. Sarah's grandfather had called it listening to the land, but it was actually an inherited ability to process multiple environmental cues and predict human behavior. Rivera trusted Sarah's assessment enough to alert the entire team. Within minutes, their position was validated as the approaching vehicles opened fire on the original smuggling group. What followed was a fierce firefight between 2 rival criminal organizations, with Sarah's team caught in an observation position overlooking the battle. The original mission parameters, passive observation, suddenly became irrelevant as the team found itself witnesses to a complex tactical situation. "Overwatch, can you identify friendly versus hostile targets?" Rivera asked over the radio. Sarah studied the developing firefight through her scope. Both groups were clearly criminal organizations engaged in territorial dispute over smuggling routes. Neither represented legitimate authority, but both pose potential threats to her team if discovered. All targets appear to be hostile organizations, she reported. Recommend maintaining concealment and documenting activities for intelligence value. But the situation deteriorated further when Sarah detected a third group, this one moving directly toward their team's positions. Someone had observed their helicopter insertion or detected their radio communications. The reconnaissance mission was about to become a direct engagement. Control, Overwatch. Unknown personnel moving toward our positions from multiple directions. Count 12 to 15 individuals, professional movement, armed. Our concealment may be compromised. Rivera made the decision that would define the mission. All positions, prepare for defensive engagement. Overwatch, you have authorization to engage targets that threaten team security. For Sarah, this was the moment her training converged with inherited ability. Her grandfather's voice seemed to whisper in her mind, "Patience, little eagle. Wait for the moment when success is certain." The approaching hostile group was approximately 600 yards away, moving through terrain that offered limited cover. Sarah had clear fields of fire and perfect environmental conditions. More importantly, she possessed the same supernatural calm under pressure that had made her grandfather legendary. Her first shot eliminated the lead scout who was directing the group toward her team's positions. The precision and timing were perfect. The target dropped silently without alerting the rest of his unit. But Sarah was already shifting to her next target. The second shot took out the group's communications specialist, identifiable by the radio antenna visible above his equipment. Again, the shot was precisely timed to avoid alerting other members of the group. By the time the hostile unit realized they were under fire from a concealed sniper, Sarah had eliminated 4 key personnel and disrupted their entire tactical formation. The remaining attackers scattered for cover, but they were now operating blind without leadership or communication. Overwatch to control, threat neutralized. Hostiles dispersed and retreating. No current threat to team positions. Rivera's voice carried amazement and professional respect. Outstanding work, Overwatch. Maintain position and continue surveillance. The firefight in the canyon below had concluded with one criminal group fleeing and the others securing the weapons cache. But the real intelligence value came from Sarah's precise documentation of personnel, equipment, vehicle identifications, and operational procedures. Over the next 6 hours, additional activity occurred as cleanup crews arrived to remove evidence and casualties from the canyon floor. Sarah recorded everything, building a comprehensive intelligence picture that would prove invaluable to counter-terrorism operations. When extraction finally came at sunset, Sarah's team had gathered intelligence that exceeded all mission expectations. More importantly, they had demonstrated tactical abilities that caught the attention of senior leadership throughout the special operations community. During the helicopter flight back to base, Rivera approached Sarah with obvious curiosity. "Chun, that shooting today, where did that come from? You performed like a seasoned operator with years of combat experience." Sarah considered her response carefully. "My grandfather taught me that shooting is about understanding the complete environment, not just aiming accurately. Today, the environment told me what needed to be done." "Your grandfather must have been quite the teacher." "He was a better teacher than I realized at the time." Back at the naval facility, Captain Torres was waiting with a complete after-action review team. Sarah's performance had been monitored remotely through communication intercepts and satellite observation. The precision and tactical decision-making she had demonstrated were already being analyzed at the highest levels of military leadership. "Recruit Chun," Torres said as she submitted her equipment. "Your shooting accuracy and tactical judgment today were exceptional. We need to discuss your future training track." What Sarah didn't know was that her performance had triggered discussions about accelerating her training and potentially assigning her to advanced programs typically reserved for operators with years of experience. That evening, she called her grandfather again. "The mission went well," she reported. "I used everything you taught me." "And how do you feel about it?" Thomas Chin asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood the psychological cost of taking human lives, even when justified. Sarah considered the question honestly. "I feel like I did what was necessary to protect my team." The decision seemed clear at the time. "That's the gift and the curse of our family's abilities," her grandfather replied. "We see what needs to be done with unusual clarity. But Remember that each decision has consequences that extend beyond the immediate moment. Do you regret your service? I regret the necessity of it. But I don't regret protecting the people I was responsible for. He paused. Sarah, you've inherited abilities that will make you valuable to the military. But they'll also place you in situations where the stakes are life and death. Choose your path carefully. 3 weeks later, Sarah completed the remaining phases of SEAL training with distinction. Her final evaluations placed her in the top 1% of all candidates, with particular recognition for marksmanship, tactical decision-making, and leadership under pressure. Captain Torres called her to his office for a final interview before graduation. Chun, you have several options for future assignment. Standard SEAL team placement, advanced sniper training, or direct assignment to specialized units that handle classified operations. Sarah had been considering this decision throughout her final weeks of training. The easy path would be standard assignment where her abilities would be recognized, but not pushed to their limits. The challenging path would mean operations where her inherited gifts would be fully utilized. Sir, I want to be assigned where I can do the most good. My grandfather trained me to protect people. I want to honor that purpose. Torres smiled. That's exactly what I hoped you would say. You'll be assigned to Naval Special Warfare Development Group for advanced training in specialized operations. Your grandfather's legacy will continue through your service. As Sarah graduated from SEAL training, she understood that her journey was just beginning. The quiet girl who had been mocked and dismissed had discovered abilities that traced back through generations of her family. More importantly, she had found a way to honor her grandfather's memory while building her own legacy of service. The skills Thomas Chun had developed in the jungles of Vietnam and passed to his granddaughter through hunting trips in Montana would now serve a new generation of American military operations. Sarah Chun had become the sniper her grandfather had trained her to be, carrying forward a family tradition of excellence in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. On graduation day, as Sarah received her SEAL insignia, she thought about the long journey from being the quiet girl everyone mocked to becoming someone her teammates looked up to and respected. The transformation had revealed not just her abilities, but her character. Captain Torres watched the ceremony with satisfaction, knowing he had witnessed the emergence of an operator who would redefine what was possible in special operations. Sarah Chin's story was just beginning, but everyone who knew her was certain it would be extraordinary.